Hello and welcome to Vaping Community's YouTube channel. I am Walt, the Smiling Ogre, and this video is going to be an introduction to DIY liquids. Now, obviously that's a huge scope, so I'm not going to try to make this any kind of tutorial. I'm not going to try to go into any great detail with this. This is just kind of an overview. This is a general idea of what it's all about. So with that, let's get started and see what we can come up with. Okay, so right from the beginning, let's try to figure out what this stuff is all about. To do that, we're going to start out with what is actually in e-liquid. Well, one of the components is propylene glycol. This is a very common component that you're going to find everywhere. You can find it on Amazon. It's used in the medical industry. It's used in the food industry, many other industries as well. A very commonplace component. Another one that's very much the same is vegetable glycerin. Again, used in foods, used in medical applications. It's a very commonplace chemical. Now we take these two and we mix them together, and that makes the basis of e-juice. That makes the solvent or the carrier for everything else that's inside of e-juice. And you'll use these two components, primarily these two components as far as volume when you mix e-liquid. In comparison, you'll use very little flavoring, you'll use very little nicotine. These are going to make up the bulk of a batch of e-liquid. Now, the propylene glycol, it excels in carrying flavors, So that's the one that if you want a lot of flavor, if you want real clean flavor, this is going to carry it the best. The vegetable glycerin, however, is going to produce more vapor. So this is the balance, that you have to achieve in your mixes. And there are a number of different common ratios. I noted a few down here at the bottom: 50-50, 40-60, 30-70, 20-80. They're all expressed, of course, in percentages. This could be 5/5, but they're 50% of each. Now, adding the liquid nicotine. Oh, by the way, you could vape just PG and VG together. It wouldn't taste very great. There's not a heck of a lot of flavor there. I've heard that VG is a little bit sweet. I couldn't verify that necessarily. I've never tried vaping just PG and or VG or put together alone. But I've heard there's a little bit of sweetness in VG, but it would be vapable. So then the next thing most people want in there is they want some nicotine in there. So we use a liquid nicotine, It can be purchased in different concentrates expressed in milligrams per milliliter, And there is 1,000 milligrams in 1 milliliter. So common dilutions, 250 milligrams, which is 25% nicotine, 100 milligrams, which is 10%, 60 milligrams for 48 milligrams, so on. So these are all common dilutions that you can purchase this stuff in. There are two primary types. That's freebase and salts. Two ways of extracting the nicotine. The freebase has been done for a longer period of time. The salts have been fairly recent. Freebase presents a stronger throat hit. That's that throat hit you get that's reminiscent of smoking. It will produce a little bit stronger of a throat hit. Salts present a milder throat hit, and they're often used to deliver more nicotine with less irritation. So if you're just quitting cigarettes and you go out and you buy freebase nicotine in an e-liquid and you get 18% or 18 milligrams per milliliter to be the way to say it. If you get that, and it doesn't seem to necessarily satisfy you as far as nicotine, but you don't want any more throat irritation than that, then you can go to a salt, and you can get it in higher doses, higher concentrations of nicotine, all the way up to 50, quite frankly, in some of these little disposable e-cigarettes, with quite a bit less throat irritation. Common strength for people having vaped um, or just starting to vape, just getting off of smoking, around 12 to 24 milligrams, okay, per milliliter. Common strength for people having vaped for a long term, okay, could be as low as 2 milligrams, even 0 for that matter. Some folks just like to vape and they really don't need nicotine anymore, but they just like the activity of vaping. So they'll get right down to 0 milligrams of nic there. Okay, nicotine strength is sometimes confused, okay, because sometimes if you get 3 milligrams, if you see people getting 3 milligram per milliliter e-liquid in a store, and they'll just say, give me 3%. Well, that's almost like a slang term. It isn't really 3%, it's actually 0.3%. But it's easier than saying 3 milligrams per milliliter. Okay, so it flies. It's just a term that's used. I guess there are a lot of terms in this industry that you'll have to get used to. That and a lot of acronyms. Okay, and it also can be confused down here at the bottom. We'll talk about using an e-liquid calculator, and when you use it in an e-liquid calculator, that calculator isn't going to talk about percentage of actual nicotine. Okay, it's going to talk about the percentage of the nicotine concentrate that you need to add. Okay, so if it says you're going to add 2%, it's saying that you're going to add 2%, you're going to add in comparison to total volume of the mix, 2% of that will be the nicotine and the PG or VG that it's suspended in. So there can be some confusion there as well. Now, safety regarding liquid nicotine. This subject in itself is highly toxic. There have been some scientific studies that have been published that claim that nicotine can cause cancer. As far as I know, they've all been retracted. It's just not true. There are a lot of people who would like to get rid of vaping. I don't want to go deep into that. Okay, it becomes very political. Other studies indicate the levels that we use in e-liquids, they're no harmful than caffeine. I'm in that camp. That's my belief. At any rate, without belaboring it too awful much, regardless, liquid nicotine prior to being diluted in e-juice is toxic. And the higher the concentration, the higher the toxicity, okay? So if you purchase at 100 milligrams, it's going to be more toxic, okay, in that bottle than it would be if you bought it at 48. So it is recommended to wear eye protection, wear gloves, and protect your skin from exposure because nicotine can be absorbed through the skin. So you don't want to have a whole bunch of it splash on you and then let that soak in. That just would not be good practice. Flavor concentrate, the last thing that you're going to find inside of an e-juice. This is where it gets complicated. This is where the art starts. Okay, there are just a ton of flavor concentrates to choose from. Fruits and creams and pastries and cereals, and on it goes. Many different manufacturers to choose from. TPA, Flavor Art, Flavora, again, just a ton of different manufacturers. Many different levels of concentration. There are concentration super concentrates. There are super duper concentrates, and I forget what they call them, but ultra concentrate, something like that. Okay. Now, there are many books written on this subject, so you can purchase books on it. Many websites are dedicated to this art. There are resources such as baking and drink mixing flavor pairing lists that you can come up with. You can go to some of these sites where, the people who mix drinks say, they'll come out and they'll say, okay, fine, strawberry goes really good with raspberry. This goes really good with that, et cetera, et cetera. So that can be helpful as far as putting together a mix. There are YouTube's channels dedicated to the art, okay? And I'll put some links in the description. Obviously, one really good resource is the vaping community. I mean, there are a ton of people on there who do DIY. There are a ton of recipes you can look at and, better understand what's going on. They'll give you an idea of how much of each different concentrate that's usually used in a mix, these type of things that can help guide you along. And then the last thing I wanted to mention here is flavor testing. I wrote down here, strawberry is not strawberry is not strawberry. And what I'm getting at there, there are a ton of different strawberries made by a ton of different manufacturers. No two taste alike. Okay, so there are different things you can do. You can read flavor notes on sites such as the Vaping Community. You can search the internet and see if anybody has anything specific to say about one particular flavor by a manufacturer. Okay, or you could do single flavor testing. Now, there are many methods, from putting a drop of it that diluted in water on your finger to making a small batch of e-liquid with just that one flavor and vaping that. So, again, there are also videos on YouTube about SFT or single flavor testing, but there again, that's just a practice. That's a really good practice to understand each flavor first before you try to start mixing them together. So next thing we're going to cover is actually starting to measure these and how to actually create a mix. Okay, so we figured out all the ingredients we're going to use and talked about those. Now, how do we know how much of each ingredient to use? That's where a calculator comes into play, an e-liquid calculator. I'm using the one on Vaping Community Forum, and it is the free one for everybody. You don't have to log on. You don't have to become a member. It's just open to the general public. Real simple to use. Start with a name. Like to use, could spell it right, I guess. Okay, I like to use that one just for example. Now, how much are we gonna make? Usually we make it to a bottle size, 30 milliliters, 60 milliliters, 120 milliliters, maybe a full liter, whatever. Okay, so I'm gonna say that I'm gonna make 30 milliliters, a fairly small bottle. The next one, it wants to know the desired VG. Now, we've talked about this. We want to come up with a PG-VG ratio, okay, but it only talks about VG here. Well, let's put in how much that 50% would be, and it shows over here that it wants that in percentage. So 50% is how much I'm going to want of VG. And over here, you can see with the PG-VG, it automatically calculates, okay, how that's going to work out, okay, between the PG and the VG. Pretty sharp. Okay, so now we're going to go into the nicotine itself. I'm going to delete a couple things here. I'm going to delete these three and show you over here that 50-50 ratio does work out. You can see it in milliliters and you can see it in percentages. Now, it isn't going to be the same in grams. We talked about that. The VG is thicker and the VG is heavier. So it would make sense that the grams would be different even though the amounts are the same. So down to the nicotine. Let's say we're going to make it for, okay. Oh, okay. Going to make it for 3 milligrams per milliliter. Okay, that's the strength in the vape juice itself. Okay, the finished product. Now, the nicotine strength, how did we buy it? We talked about that as well. You can get it in, I forget what they all were, even 100, 60, 48, whatever. Okay, so now I buy it in 100 milligrams per milliliter, or at 10%. Okay, and then the PG content of the nicotine. Here again, it's asking what carrier did you buy that nicotine in? And we talked about that a little bit. Is it PG, VG, or 50-50? I buy mine in 100% VG, and that's what it asks for. How much VG do I buy that in? Okay, and over here in a calculator, you can see all these things adding up over here. So, flavors. Here's where you have to make up your mind for yourself. Which flavors are you going to use, and what strength of the flavors are you going to use? So this is going to be research on your part. I use strawberry, as the name would indicate. And the first strawberry I use is the Sisha by Inawarna. I use that at 3%. The second one that I use is also a strawberry. And that one is the Red Touch Strawberry by Flavor Art, which I use at 3%. And there you have it. Viola. We have got, okay, everything calculated for us over here, either in milliliters, so you can measure it that way, or in grams, measure it by weight. Okay, so we know how much of every single ingredient to put into this mix to come up with 30 milliliters of e-juice. Now, notice, I'll bring this back up, but some of these are pretty small. In fact, let's add another flavor. There is another flavor in this, and that is sweetener. I just want to put this in to demonstrate a point. And hopefully I can find it. It's one of them that's vapable. We use this one right here. Yeah, we use that one right there. The sucralose sweetener. And I do use 5%. So we'll go down to here. Now notice that is 0.15 gram. That is a very small amount. Okay. And I'm just bringing that up because here in a little bit, when we start measuring this stuff out, okay, that's going to come into play. Now, along with that, I'm going to make 1,000 milliliters, or 1 full liter. Now, if we go over here and we look at these things, it's quite a bit different, obviously. Okay, I've got 5 grams and 5 milliliters, okay, of sweetener. 30 milliliters of the two flavors, 500 milliliters of EG, and 405 of PG. So again, when we start talking about mixing this up, that is going to come into play. So here we have it. You have just created your first recipe. You can print this off, or whatever you want to do, or use it right here on the screen. There's also another video that covers this a little bit better. Okay, it'll show you other things that you can do with this and whatnot on the vaping community YouTube. So, but for now, that's going to be suffice for what we want to accomplish here. So let's go on to the next step. Let's start measuring. Now comes measuring. And there's a few ways this can be done. You can use measuring cups that are marked milliliters on the side. You can use graduated cylinders. This particular one will read up to 25 milliliters and is in 0.1 milliliter increments. You can use syringes of various sizes, and they'll obviously have, different amounts that you can siphon up into them, and then a different resolution as far as how fine you can read that. And then also these little squeeze tube siphons that are hard to see, but they also have markings on them, so you can use that. Okay, and measure by milliliter that way. Another way to do it is by drop, and each drop, let's put it this way. Each milliliter takes between 30 and 50 drops. So the problem with that method is that if you look at these different tips, and I'm sure with the resolution of the camera right there, it'll be a little difficult to see, but I'm sure you'll get the idea. Okay. There's a huge size difference between all these tips. So a drop is not a drop is not a drop, kind of like the strawberry thing. So to do that with any kind of accuracy, you'd have to take each one of the ingredients in its bottle and measure out a milliliter, counting the drops, and try to go that way. Now, these two methods aren't too awful bad if you're doing large batches, because if you get a deviation of a tenth of a liter or something like that, it isn't the end of the world if you're mixing a full liter of juice. So you can still get accurate enough to get a really decent flavor or whatever. But for the most part, this last method is the method that is prescribed, and that's using a balance, okay, and actually mixing by weight. Okay, in this methodology, or with this methodology, you would take the scale, put whatever you're going to mix in on there, tare, okay, use your recipe, okay, add drop by drop until you get as close as you can to what the recipe calls for, in grams. Tare again, add the next one, tare again, add the next one. Now, it still probably isn't going to be perfect because every drop is somewhere between 2 and 3/100ths of a gram. So you're never going to get it dead on, but you can get it close. Some people use scales that are 3 digits behind the decimal point to try to get a greater degree of accuracy. It doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense to me because of the weight of each drop, but I've heard some people actually even split drops somehow. I don't know how that's done, but they do it. So, at any rate, that's another methodology. But you want at least 2 digits behind the decimal point. At least that kind of accuracy. Now, as far as putting in ingredients, how you add them, what order, PG, VG flavors don't matter too awful much. There's another advanced method we'll talk about in a bit where there may be some considerations in the order there, okay? But then there's nicotine. And I keep my nicotine chilled in a brown bottle because oxygen, heat, and light will all affect nicotine. Nicotine will actually corrode, okay? It'll oxidize. And over time, you'll see mixes turning, from yellow to brown to getting to look pretty darn nasty. That will degrade, okay, the quality of the nicotine in the mix, and eventually it will affect the flavor. So what a number of people will do if they are mixing large batches, that's going to be around for a while, is they'll mix like a liter, okay, and not put any nicotine in it right away, okay. They'll go ahead and they'll stir that up and steep it, and we'll talk about all that in a bit here. Do whatever they're going to do. And then when they break it out into smaller bottles, they'll pour off like 30 milliliters. Then they'll add the nic proportionate to that 30 milliliters, okay? And go ahead and vape it so that nicotine is not sitting inside of that solution unattended, or basically, being subjected to oxidation. All right, so we've got it all measured up and whatnot, and we're getting ready to stir it or mix it. Now, there are a number of different ways, probably countless different ways to do this. Grabbed some pictures here to give some ideas. Here we have a handheld mixer and or frother. Okay, some people here we have a magnetic stir. Here we have an overhead stir. Here we have a paint shaker. Yes, people actually do that. Okay, here we have hand shaking. I've even heard of people doing such crazy things as getting a bottle somehow affixed to a Sawzall and vibrating the heck out of it with that. So, and another one is some people will, speaking of vibrate, some people will vibrate it inside of an ultrasonic cleaner. Those ultrasonic waves will have a tendency to help blend the different ingredients together. Now, The caveat to all of these, or at least these three, your blender, your overhead stir, and your magnetic stir, what you don't want to do is what they've got pictured right here in this magnetic stir. You don't want to draw a vortex, because drawing a vortex is pulling oxygen down into that mix. Now, if you have nicotine in that mix, you already know that you're subjecting that nicotine to oxygen, and that's going to accelerate the oxidation process. The other thing that drawing a vortex or adding oxygen to the mix is going to do is it's going to free up what we call volatiles in the flavor concentrates. Now, what that's all about is, especially with vaping, okay, a lot of what we perceive in terms of flavor is smell, okay, odor. And so if you introduce oxygen, that oxygen will have a tendency to carry a lot of those volatiles out of the mix and into the open air, okay, depleting a lot of the actual flavor in terms of the smell, okay? So that's something you really don't want to do. You want to keep it down to where you're not pulling oxygen, okay, into that mix. Beyond that, what can I say about it? You definitely, with these things, the handheld mixers, you definitely don't want to get it going so fast that it creates a froth, because there again, that's just a massive introduction of oxygen into that mix, and it just that'll really mute flavor in a hurry. So not the best practice for sure. Another thing worth mention is if you use heavier blends, in other words, greater amounts of VG, and you get up into your 60, 70, 80% VG, okay, it's going to be resistant to a magnetic stir. Most of the magnets you buy, the standard magnets you get, okay, they will not want to spin very fast at all, and they'll lose connection with the magnet underneath, which is spinning to obviously stir the liquid. So you would probably most likely want to look into a rare earth magnet. They're much stronger, okay, and they look like little pellets. You just drop the magnet into the liquid, okay, and it'll immediately obviously go to the bottom because of gravity, but also because of the magnet inside the stirrer here. And when that magnet inside the stirrer starts spinning, that rare earth magnet will have a tendency to latch onto it better and keep spinning even with that thick liquid. So now, with all of these methods, okay, there is what we call a steep or a steeping period. And what that is just time. Okay, take that bottle of e-juice, a lot like your nicotine, keep it cool, keep it out of the sunlight. Okay, put it away someplace. Some people will, daily or weekly or whatever, pick it up and give it a shake and then put it back. Steep periods vary greatly. Okay, there are a lot of notes, okay, within a lot of the recipes in regard to steep periods, where other people found that they would taste the best. What you're doing is you're giving this time to finish thoroughly blending, okay, through this steeping process. Like I say, it can last for a few days with simple things like fruits, to getting into custards and good grief, creams. You may go a month, okay, with this steeping process. So there you go. That's how you mix. In its simplest form, a bottle and a cap, and shake the heck out of it and let it steep for a while, and you'll have some e-juice. Okay, well, I am pretty much fried on talking. There is one other topic I'm going to bring up just briefly, and that's another methodology of mixing, and it's considered to be an advanced methodology. It's heating the VG and using a homogenizer. Now, up until very recently, it was just cost prohibitive, and A handheld homogenizer through one of the medical companies was thousands of dollars. It really just didn't make sense for the normal DIY mixer to even consider such a thing. However, recently one gentleman has come out with a homogenizing probe that's at a very good price point, and it'll work with different mono tools, your rapid spinning handheld, you know, mono tools, and those are also inexpensive. There's also a few Chinese made homogenizers that are fair. Okay, I have one and it does work. So, how long it'll last, I have no idea, but it does work. The one that's made here in the States by the gentleman that I just mentioned, though, is very robust, and it's a fine piece of equipment. At any rate, that differs from the other methodologies in as much as after you're done homogenizing it, which is the process of high-speed shear mixing, which only takes about a minute. And once you're done with that, you need to let it settle. And I typically let mine settle overnight, but there is no steeping beyond that. You've got the finished product right then. It's going to be as if it were steeped however long. Okay, and it's going to last as if it had been steeped however long. So that's another interesting, real interesting methodology. There are caveats to that. There's a lot of consternation regarding heating the VG. Now, I heat my VG to 140 degrees Fahrenheit or 60 degrees Celsius, and what I do is I mix everything else first, or pour everything else first. I shouldn't say mix. I pour everything else, measure everything else first, and then add the heated VG and immediately move it to the homogenizer and homogenize. Thought there being, again, you don't want to introduce the nicotine to heat. And there's quite a bit of consternation as to whether you want to mix or introduce too much heat to some of the flavorings as well. I've noted absolutely no degradation in my mixes from using that methodology. There are tons of other people that are coming up with the exact same results. I haven't really heard of any naysayers as of yet who have actually tried this methodology. Again, this is something that if you're interested, I do have a video describing that entire process, also up on the Vaping Community's YouTube channel. And there's plenty of discussion on the vaping community regarding this methodology. So again, if that's something you are interested in or become interested in, you've got some resources to better understand that. So with that, I have got to quit. My throat is getting real hoarse. I am really tired of talking. I hope this is helpful to someone, some folks here. I can see where it's a necessary topic, to say the least. So, at any rate, we'll see you again soon. There are more tutorials / presentations, okay, whatever you want to call them, coming up here with the vaping community. So stay tuned. Talk to you later.